Toma.
You ever have that feeling where you blink and suddenly that really essential skill from just last year feels, well, almost obsolete?
Oh, absolutely. The pace is just incredible.
It's wild, isn't it? Especially when you think about our careers. And it really makes you stop and think, how do we actually keep up? Us as individuals and our organizations too.
Yeah, how do we manage that constant change?
Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into this idea of lifelong learning, not just as a buzzword, though.
Right, something more concrete.
Exactly. We're looking at it as a critical strategy for staying relevant, for actually thriving in this professional world that just keeps shifting.
Constantly evolving, yeah.
And our guide for this exploration is a really interesting source called Learning All Along. And it gets into not just why encouraging continuous development is so important for employees,
Which is key.
but crucially, how companies can actually make it happen effectively. So we're aiming to pull out some core insights, practical strategies, maybe even a few surprising bits you might find useful right away.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Okay, so let's just set the scene. The world is changing incredibly fast. I mean, the knowledge, the skills, even the kind of attitudes that make you successful today, they might not be the winning formula in 5 or 10 years from now. It's a bit daunting, really. So what does all this constant churn actually mean for companies and for all of us working in them?
Well, it fundamentally means that continuous adaptation isn't just, a nice bonus anymore. It's really a business imperative. Companies have to adapt to survive, let alone thrive.
Right, survival.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, something the source highlights, is that employees themselves, they get this overwhelmingly.
Oh, really? They see the need?
Yeah, there's this statistic cited, I think it's from Pew Research. It found that 54% of American workers believe it's absolutely essential to keep developing their workplace skills, just to keep pace.
Wow, over half.
And then another 33% consider it important. So you add that up, that's 87% of the workforce already recognizing this need. They're basically saying, yes, we need to keep learning.
87%, that's huge.
It really is. And it brings up a really important question, doesn't it? If employees are already there, they're ready, they're eager, how do companies actually help them? How do they facilitate that learning effectively?
Okay, yeah, that's the crucial pivot, isn't it? From the why everyone seems to agree on to the practical how. Because if people are that keen, how do companies make lifelong learning work without it feeling like, another mandatory task or becoming incredibly expensive? What does learning all along suggest here?
Right. So one of the core ideas is that truly effective lifelong learning, it really has to connect with a person's own interests. It can't just be top down.
Okay, interest-driven. Makes sense.
Yeah. Companies need to figure out ways to let each employee make some meaningful choices about what they learn and also how they learn it.
Choices. Okay, like what specifically?
Well, think about it. You might have one person who's really keen to, say, sharpen their sales techniques. But someone else might feel, actually, for my role, a deeper dive into marketing principles would be way more valuable.
Different needs, different roles.
Exactly. And people learn differently too, right? One person might thrive in a workshop, group setting, expert facilitator. Another might just want to grab some materials and do some focused self-study.
Okay. But then the practical side. Companies can't just foot the bill for every single course anyone fancies, right? That sounds chaotic and expensive.
Absolutely not. And the source is very clear on that. It warns against just opening the floodgates and paying for any course. That would be, like you said, incredibly expensive and probably quite wasteful too.
So there needs to be some control.
Yes. Companies definitely need to maintain some oversight, both on the actual learning areas, making sure they align, at least broadly, with the company's needs, and obviously on the overall costs involved.
Okay, so how do you balance that? Giving choice, but keeping it aligned and affordable. What are the practical solutions?
Well, the source suggests a couple of really effective approaches. One is for the company to offer let's say, a curated range of training options.
Curated,
Meaning they're pre-selected because they match the company's strategic needs. So employees still get to choose, but from a list that makes sense for the business.
Got it. Option 1, curated list. What's the other?
The other possibility, which gives even more individual control, is to give each employee an annual budget, a specific amount set aside just for their professional development.
Oh, interesting, like a personal learning fund.
Pretty much. Now, Companies would still need to approve the specific courses chosen, check they're relevant.
Sure, makes sense. Can't spend it on basket weaving unless you work for a basket company.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But this budget approach, it really gets employees involved in the decision-making. They feel invested, they've chosen it, and that makes them much more motivated to actually learn. It's not a free-for-all. It's about smart curation and empowerment.
That makes a lot of sense. Giving people that agency, that feeling of investment. Okay, so employees are choosing their paths, maybe using a budget, they're motivated. But what happens after the learning?
Yes. Recognition.
Yeah. How does the company actually acknowledge all of this diverse growth? Because sometimes just doing the course isn't enough, is it? It needs to be valued somehow. What does the source say about recognizing and rewarding this?
You've really hit on a vital point there. And the source breaks it down into sort of two crucial aspects. First, the basics. Companies absolutely have to cover the direct costs. Approved courses, travel, maybe even extra childcare needed to attend. That's table stakes, really.
Okay, covering costs, essential,
Yeah.
but...
All that investment, the time, the money, the effort.
Yeah.
It can feel wasted if that learning doesn't actually lead to clear benefits in the person's career.
Right. Needs to connect back.
Exactly. Now, an increased salary is obviously one way to recognize that achievement, and an important one.
Sure. Money talks.
It does. But it's definitely not the only way. And sometimes non-monetary recognition can be just as, if not more, powerful for motivation and culture.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Like, what kind of non-monetary recognition?
Well, the source gives some great, really concrete examples. Imagine a manager taking the time to present an employee who's just finished a course with their certificate, but doing it in front of the whole department.
Public acknowledgement.
Exactly. Or another idea mentioned is creating something like an achievement wall, a physical or maybe digital space where employees can actually share their learning successes, what they've completed, what they're proud of.
Making it visible.
Precisely. It's about making learning visible, making it celebrated, embedding it as something genuinely valued within the company culture. It shows the company isn't just, paying lip service to development. They actively celebrate.
I like that. It builds momentum, maybe encourages others too.
For sure. It creates a positive feedback loop.
Now, this final point you mentioned from the source, it sounds like it might challenge some common practices. It's about the company's overall attitude towards professional development.
Yes, this one is really interesting.
What does learning all along say about formal requirements versus more informal encouragement? This sounds key.
It is, and it might be a bit counterintuitive for some. One of the really striking findings discussed is that when professional development becomes a purely formal requirement,
like mandatory training hours checked off in reviews.
Exactly that. When it's meticulously measured, formally tracked, part of your annual review KPIs, it can actually have a negative effect on employee motivation.
Really? It backfires.
It seems so. It can turn learning, which should be exciting and empowering, into just another box to tick.
Yeah.
Another corporate chore, rather than a genuine opportunity for growth.
Okay, so if formal requirements can be demotivating, what's the alternative? What's the preferred approach?
The source strongly suggests looking for opportunities to encourage lifelong learning in a much more informal way, making it part of the natural fabric of the workplace.
Informal, like how? Can you give examples?
Yeah, simple but powerful things, like instead of a stiff discussion in a formal performance review, a manager just casually asks an employee, maybe over lunch or grabbing a coffee, "Hey, how's that course going?" Or, "What did you think of that article?"
Low pressure check-ins.
Exactly. Or another brilliant, simple idea, organizing an informal book club.
A book club? At work?
Yeah, maybe once a month, say. Each employee could suggest a book connected to work. Could be leadership, industry trends, a new skill. The members just get together for a short time, maybe after work, have a relaxed, informal chat about what they learned, what sparked ideas.
I can see how that builds community and learning.
Right. It's almost like creating this subtle, positive current of learning flowing through the company. It makes you ask, how can we weave learning into the everyday, make it feel organic, part of the natural flow, instead of this separate, sometimes burdensome obligation.
A current of learning. I really like that image because what you're describing, it feels like a real shift, doesn't it? It moves away from just like ticking the training box towards something more like genuine self-driven growth. It reminds me of, some of the best teams I've been on. Often it was those informal moments, sharing an article, debating an idea that really sparked learning, maybe even more than the official training days.
Absolutely. Those moments often stick with you more.
Wow. Okay. This has been a fantastic deep dive into learning all along. So much to think about. Let's maybe just quickly recap those key takeaways.
Good, yeah.
We started with that fundamental need for continuous learning. It's undeniable, driven by the changing world, but also, crucially, by employees wanting to grow. That 87% statistic is really telling.
Definitely. The desire is there.
Then we talked about the power of choice, giving employees meaningful options in what and how they learn, maybe through curated lists or that annual budget idea, real agency.
Which boosts motivation significantly.
And then the recognition piece. Yes, covering costs is vital, but also finding ways to celebrate learning both financially and non-financially, like that public acknowledgment or achievement wall, making it visible and valued.
Celebrating success.
And finally, that perhaps surprising insight about company attitude, leaning into informal encouragement, casual conversations, maybe even a book club, over rigid, formal requirements that can sometimes kill motivation.
The power of the informal touch.
Exactly. So here's a thought to leave you with. How might you, maybe in your own work life or perhaps within your team or organization, start to weave in more of these informal, interest-driven approaches to learning?
Good question.
Could something as simple as starting a casual book club or just making space for those informal chats about learning over coffee, could that actually spark a wave of new knowledge, new motivation in a way that maybe more formal training sometimes misses?
It's definitely food for thought.
Think about the potential ripple effect that could have.